name Waco, Texas may naturally come with the word cult. Many will see that as familiar, recognize it, and think they know what is being spoken of. However, what most think of is something of the past. Very few know that it is still in the present. It is a place of many lies that have been twisted to make it look like something it is not. It is a cult that has gone unnoticed for decades. And many visit it, enjoy it, and don't realize what exactly they are supporting. It all started back in the early 70s. A man named Blair Adams came out of the Oneness Pentecostal churches. At the time, he was very much going down a different road than many have. He was searching for a place to minister. If you look at his story and what he's told and what others have told, it's hard to get the full picture. Things have been very diluted. Some things seem to be very hidden. However, what you do find is he was going to many churches and trying to speak his own message. Something that you will often hear of many cult leaders before they begin to build their cult. And Blair Adams started his the same way. After so long of doing this, he eventually started a church within New York City. It was called Voice in the Wilderness. It started somewhere between 1973 and 1974. I am more inclined to believe 1974 from the different people I've heard it from, but somewhere within those 2 years, they started this church in downtown New York. However, one thing you'll hear different stories about is where he lived. He did not live within the same neighborhood as this church was started. However, some followed what he said and just accepted what he told them and believed he lived in a very, very dark, difficult part of the city and things were very trying for him. However, when one looks into it closely enough, you find this was mostly a lie to make it look like he was going through the trials and the struggles to bring people to the truth, which were very untrue. There have been many rumors about how this started. Some have said that he claimed that if you followed his teachings and you came to believe what he taught you and followed this practice, you would never have to fear being infected by cancer. That would never be a problem for you, which supposedly also started much judgment for anybody who did have this come into their family. I'm not certain of this, but this is something some have said. One thing I am more confident to say was it all went down a dark road. Very slowly, and it started at a point when a voice came to speak to him, and he began to levitate while in bed. Now, some would think this is a wild story. Some who followed him believed it was completely true, and this was the Lord speaking to him and showing him things. However, as I'm inclined to believe, and even some former members have told me, this is where they think things went wrong. It was possibly not just an angel, but a fallen angel. This could have been something demonic. And is at this point, people say some of the heretic teachings started to show themselves. As this happened, trouble stirred up. In 1976, they left downtown New York and started in New Jersey, another fellowship called New Life Fellowship. This one lasted a little longer, but not much. Eventually, this one grew to a point where it ended up being a division of about 100 people, or at least that's what they claim. It is hard to be certain of this because there are other things they tell that are very misleading. But supposedly, this number of people split because of things Blair was teaching. Because of the direction it went, they also felt they needed to get away from the city. They were supposed to separate from the world. And because of this division and that inclination, they decided to leave New York completely and moved to Colorado in 1979, where they would start their new fellowship that was eventually called the Emmaus Christian Fellowship. This fellowship was very much them becoming this separate community. This is when it really started to become what you normally see as a cult. However, this did not go over well with those in the local area. There became many conflicts between people there within their community and the people that lived around them. There were fights over the lands, fights over different things they were doing with them. And eventually, this became a conflict, not just those in the local area, but the state itself. They began building their businesses as similar to what they have now. However, at the time, they tried to kind of get away with it and treat it more like it was just this ministry and avoid different rules and laws that the state started to come after them for. At this point, they started to move some people to Austin, Texas, around 1980 to 1981. This was a small group at first that slowly grew over time. As the tensions grew, more people moved. So they were not quick to leave, but they did start to slowly move in that direction. I've been told by former members that were there at the time, it was between 1984 and 1987 that really the move started taking place. And the further the tensions raised, the further it went. Unsurprisingly, from what I have received, what documents I have been given, it was in 1990 that they finally started to build their community within Waco, Texas. There were many heated letters of lies, deceit, tricks, tensions between both media and Homestead Heritage. However, they still were going by the title Emmaus Christian Fellowship, or as many called it at the time, the Fellowship. In 1990, as they reached that high point, they started building in Waco, and many moved to a nearby location. At first, this was just their way of sort of escaping Colorado, escaping all that tension, all those problems. But they decided to do even more with it because the tensions didn't stay very localized. In 1992, a book came out called Churches That Abuse. Within this, it spoke of different churches or cults that would abuse its power or people in different ways. Within this book, it brought attention to Emmaus Christian Fellowship abusing the children. With this coming out in 1992, things got worse for what was Emmaus Christian Fellowship. In 1994 is when they changed their title to Homestead Heritage. It was at the same time that they started building a place for those who come in as guests. Started to do more to build a better relationship with the community, make themselves look more substantial, and hide more of the lies, hide more of the abuse. 1994 to 2020, they continued to do this. They continued changing things, building up their reputation, building their businesses, building their structure, and getting more and more ground, not just in Waco, but abroad, to where they have locations across the globe now. Some of the major ones being in South Africa, New Zealand, all across the US, etc. Then, 2021, their leader, Blair Adams, passed away of cancer, and his son, Ozzy, has since then taken the lead and has become their primary teacher, and has seemed to try to not only continue the growth, we've seen many ways he seems to be attempting to gain an even better and stronger reputation, and so it continues to grow. Taking a closer look at what Homestead Heritage is really about, first thing one would do is go into their website. The way their website is built, the way things are set up, is why Homestead Heritage has gone unnoticed, is why it has been identified as a cult by very few places, because they are very good at sounding like something they are not. Of their teachings that are off from most Christianity, the one that they are most open about is oneness. However, what they don't show you right away, but you learn if you start paying close attention and read more of the books by Blair Adams, you find they take it to a much more extreme level than most oneness Pentecostals would take. For them, Jesus is not truly God. They claim, they say he is 100% God, 100% man. However, as soon as you start asking questions and looking into it more closely, what they mean by this is not what every other Christian would mean. What they mean by this is that his flesh is 100% man, and the Spirit of God is 100% in him. Ultimately, they only see him as another man that has the Spirit of God in him. And because of this union, he is the Christ. Because of this union, he can claim to be God. He can say, I am, because of that union and obedience he has. This is stated in Blair's books. It takes more reading to find this, and it takes more to see these teachings, because they keep a lot of their darker teachings deeper and deeper in the books. And it is by this that a lot of the other false teachings they have start sneaking their way in and go unnoticed. Because they take this to a point where they teach you must be rid of yourself. When you join Homestead Heritage, that is one of the first things you have to do. They give you about 145 pages worth of their teachings and have you sign it in multiple places. That you fully agree with it, you fully follow it, and you have no disagreements with it. Once you do this, you are baptized, or at least their way of baptizing. However, to them, it is not a matter of showing you have come to the Lord and he has given you a new birth. No, to them, this is a matter of you becoming a part of their body, what they call the body of Christ. It's not about you being saved, you being born again. It's about you being born into this body. And now, you do not have any identity that is your own. The body itself is your identity. To them, since Jesus was called the Christ because God was in him, they now call themselves the Christ. They have now taken his title and given it to themselves. This is the foundation of what takes everything of their beliefs to a place where they can take full advantage of it. They have many other teachings that are coming from this and twisting things, but they're all for the same reason. One of them, they often consider themselves the New Jerusalem. Some, though few actually come out and say it, some speak as though they are now Israel, and they believe you're saved by works. And they keep going further and further with these teachings because of this foundation. Now, because they are the body, because it's all by works, this is why they live within this very structured society with all these rules and practices that you must follow. Because of this, it can appear to many to be very similar to an Amish community. Many make that comparison. The only comparison I really see there is the appearance. It's mentioned most because that is what they appear to be. But it's not what they are. I've heard many different stories about different ways they go along with teachings that would seem very much like an Amish community. That you shouldn't use anything mechanical, everything needs to be manual labor. However, I've heard stories that are very almost comical, where leaders have run out at times to people who are using things like a lawnmower or weeder or something like that. Tell them they have to change what they're doing to a more manual form of labor because there are going to be visitors coming, and they don't want people to see that. However, another side of it that they do hold to a lot stronger is what they wear. They have very, very similar rules when it comes to what kind of dresses, what kind of pants, what kind of shirts, etc. However, these rules have changed over time. But then there are other rules that are not as much Amish, but ironically go in a more Mormon direction. For two examples, there were two things they used to keep people from having. No coffee, no chocolate. However, these have changed. Chocolate, apparently, from what rumors have given as the reason, one of the daughters of leadership loved chocolate so much, they decided to change the rule. The other one that I see far more suspicious is they changed it so that you could have coffee again, but at the same time, they built a new business selling coffee. Which came first? I have my suspicions. But that's the thing. The look of their community, a lot of the rules they have are not constant. They're just trying to look separate from the world. That's their whole idea. That's what makes it so a lot of people join in. They want to be part of that kind of community, that kind of fellowship. Some people because they're sick of the way the world is. They don't like the way the world is. Others, they want to fully experience it. And that is what really can draw people in. Experience is a word Homestead uses over and over and over again. They try to convince those who come in that what really matters isn't what they teach, it's what you experience. That you shouldn't try to go to people and just teach them the truth. Instead, you need to help them experience it. This is where some of the dangers come. One thing that has come out over the years is multiple cases of abuse. One of the first ones, the one that's most constant, is within their teachings about all these rules, all these regulations, to build this separate society culture they want to have pushed the parents to be very strict, very demanding of their children. Some say some of the stories have been blown out of proportion, but multiple parents, some I know, have had to admit that yes, they're forced to punish their children way too much. But not just because this is what they should do, this is the way it needs to be done, this is the right process. No, the way they do this is by convincing so much of it being by works, and this punishment being what's going to decide that. They make it so that these parents believe if they don't punish enough, their children are going to hell. It's one of the things that is used by every cult. Fear. And this fear of their children and themselves going to hell is how Homestead controls them. And yet, they get so little control of certain people. Because sadly enough, there have been multiple former members who have been convicted of child abuse or even molestation. Some of the stories are very dark. There have been at least 6 cases. Probably more we don't know about. But every case, you can be pretty sure they tried to hide it. They tried to keep it unnoticed. But in a very clever way, so that if it was going to come out, they could get it out fast enough, their deceit wouldn't be seen. But it doesn't just end at that point. For those who leave Homestead Heritage, often they will be threatened by the leadership, who will tell them they will be punished by God if they leave. Not only that, they will start, quote-unquote, praying to God for this punishment. I've heard multiple stories from multiple people who left of different ways they tried to bring this judgment upon them. More of that fear. And it is partly by that things have gone unnoticed. What Homestead Heritage does that keeps them so well hidden is, first of all, almost everybody they bring in who is not born into the cult comes from them penetrating a church, making people believe they are Christian, and then pulling them in by that. And then slowly twisting the teachings, twisting their views, their beliefs, without letting them see the difference. It's how they get people in, and it's how they go unnoticed. Who joined that way, by being deceived like that, still won't want to admit, because usually they don't leave for that reason. Those who leave who are born into it have no way of knowing about that. They're coming at it where that's all they were taught. They don't know what's really taught within the Christian community. They don't know what's taught within different religions. They only know what's taught in Homestead Heritage. But not only that, unlike some cults, Homestead Heritage does not cut them off entirely from the outside community. Only way they're going to cut you off from your family is if your family starts speaking against Homestead Heritage or their teachings. It is significantly, a lot of what they kept hidden is hidden because of this. Because those who know, those who are outside Homestead, who have seen what's wrong, seen the problems, will not say anything because they want to keep contact with their family that stays inside, with their friends that remain there. And when they don't go out, trying to pull anybody outside of churches into their community, word isn't going to spread of what's really going on. The other thing that keeps them very hidden is their wording. They even have what is called the Devil's Dictionary. In this, they give different definitions of different words that are used in Scripture. They'll give definitions that they call the corrupt definitions, and then they'll give what they call the biblical definitions. And this does several things. First of all, this makes it so that when people are talking about a certain teaching or a certain part of theology, what most people would think of is completely different from what those in Homestead Heritage will think of. They'll be talking about two completely different topics. Second thing it does, many of what they call the corrupt definitions, they imply other churches teach when they don't. A lot of them nobody teaches. But because they're stuck within their community, they don't see that. And because of that, if they share any of this stuff they see as false teaching with somebody outside of Homestead, they'll be in complete agreement. It'll seem perfectly fine. And because of these different words, definitions, when they start to go into any discussion of theology or teachings or anything like that, they'll sound like they're in complete agreement when what they're saying is something else entirely, because it's as though they are not speaking the same language. Then the last, what you could call their line of defense, would be their businesses. They do annual fairs where they sell a lot of things they, quote unquote, make there, which I've heard from multiple sources. Some of them are, some of them aren't. And they try to have their own little diner that supposedly all the food is from what they grow and make there on their property, which again, I've heard is not always the case. But they use this as a facade. They put this as their camouflage to make it look as though they're just this pleasant, calm, peaceful community, and they're not there pushing any kind of cultic teachings. They're not trying to stay so separate from society. They're just trying to look like an innocent Amish community. And this is why Homestead Heritage has been around for close to 50 years without people identifying it. And the few who have were not able to expose it very far because they would change their identity. They would change their language. They would change the way they speak. It was discovering this, learning about this, that brought me to start this channel, Christ vs. Cults. I'm hoping to do more videos speaking of other groups that are not as well known, other cults that may go unnoticed. Because after seeing this one has not just gone unnoticed, but been able to twist the minds of so many churchgoers, so many fellow Christians, I'm scared what else might sneak in. Because this seems like a very pleasant homestead, but it is trying to ruin our heritage. Keep your guard up. God bless.